I have served the Duke of Varnholme for 22 years, and I know the shape of his silences the way a man knows the weather of the county he was. Born in, I know the silence that is thought. I know the silence that is grief, and I know the one that came over him in the 4th week of January, in the year after his injury when he returned from a night storm on the Cresford Moorland Road and sat down at the writing table in his library and did not write a word. He sat there until the candles went low, then he went to bed, then he came down in the morning and sat there again. I have never asked the Duke of Varnholme what he is thinking. In 22 years it has not been necessary. He tells me what he needs to tell me and leaves the rest in its proper silence, and I have always respected that. But the 4th week of January was different, because that was the week I first noticed that the Duke, who had not smiled in 3 years, had something in his face that I could not name, not happiness. Something more careful than that, something that had not quite decided yet what it was. He had ridden out on the 17th, as he sometimes did in winter, when the hall grew too large around him. The injury to his left eye had come 3 years before. At the tail end of a campaign, no one in the county spoke of directly, and it had left him with half a field of vision and a reputation that kept most of Varnholme society at a comfortable remove. He did not ride into society any longer, and society did not press him. There was a kind of cold arrangement between the Duke and the world, and until January it had seemed to suit them both. The storm came in from the northwest around 5 o'clock, too fast to outrun, and the Duke and I took shelter at the Cresford coaching inn on the High Moorland Road, a stone building with 3 rooms, a low ceiling, and a fire that 24 stranded travelers were trying to crowd themselves around. When the Duke walked in, the crowd did what crowds did around him. It went quiet, then it rearranged itself, edges pulling back by a few inches on either side, until he had a kind of involuntary clearing around him that was not respect and not welcome, but something in between the two. He was used to it. He moved to the wall near the door and stood there, which was where he always positioned himself in a room. Because the wall gave him the side, his vision still worked, and let him keep the room in front of him. He was very cold. The ride had been long and the storm vicious, and his coat was soaked through, and his hands, I noticed, were not quite steady. The young woman was sitting beside the fire on the only chair that was not a bench, a tall-backed wooden chair set a little, apart from the others, positioned so that its occupant caught the warmest reach of the heat. She was perhaps 23, plain dressed, her hair coming loose from its pins. She was reading, not pretending to read, the way some women do when they want to appear occupied, actually reading, her attention entirely on the page, one hand curled around the cover and one foot tucked up under herself in a way that was entirely unceremonious and rather comfortable looking. She looked up. She saw the Duke standing against the wall in his soaked coat, with his face carefully still. She looked at him for a moment, the way one looks at a man who is clearly very cold and has found nowhere to stand that is warm enough. Then she stood up, closed her book, crossed the room, and said, "Would you like this chair? I have been here an hour and am quite thawed through. You look as though you have only just arrived." There was no recognition in it. She did not know who he was. The coaching inn was on the far edge of the Varnholme estate lands, and his face was not the face on coins or portraits. He was simply a tall, rain-soaked stranger with a scarred eye and a silence around him that had frightened everyone else in the room, and she had looked at him and seen a cold man. He said, "I wouldn't take your chair." She said, "You are not taking it. I am giving it. There is a difference." She said it perfectly pleasantly, without challenge, the way one states a clear fact, and then she waited for him to sit down. He sat down. I believe he was too surprised not to. What followed was 2 hours at the Cresford coaching inn while the storm hammered the moorland. Outside, and the fire worked its slow way through the room. The young woman, I did not yet know her name, and neither did the Duke, sat on the bench nearest the chair and went back to her book. But after perhaps 20 minutes, she put the book down and said, quite naturally, that the storm sounded like the one of 3 winters ago that had taken all of Hesford's elm trees. The Duke said he remembered it. She asked if he was a local man, and he said he had a house not far off, and she said she was from Cresford Market Town, come up to visit her father's factor, and that she had thought the weather would hold. They talked. I had not heard the Duke talk like that, easily, without the specific weight he put on words in rooms where his title entered before he did, in a long time. She asked him no careful questions. She offered no performance. She told him that her father dealt in wool cloth, and that she had spent 6 months in her girlhood trying to understand the ledgers, and had discovered she had rather a good head for figures, and that her father was relieved beyond measure, because her brother certainly did not. She said this with a dry affection, that made the Duke's mouth move in a way that was almost something. She did not ask about his eye. She did not avoid it either. She simply looked at him squarely and talked to him as one talks to a person, not a wound or a title, and after a while he began to do the same. The storm broke near 8. The road cleared enough to ride. She gathered her coat and her book and said it had been very good company, and wished him a safe ride, and went out with a woman who I gathered was her maid, and that was all. The Duke did not speak on the ride back. He had not spoken much in those 3 years. But this was a different silence. Not the locked silence of grief, but a silence with something moving. In it careful and alert, the way a man is silent when he is listening for something he is not certain he heard. The 4th week of January was the writing table in the library. The 5th week was the riding out toward the Cresford Road, and coming back without having gone to the town. The 6th week was the Duke standing at the tall window of the upper gallery, looking out at the frost-hard park, and when I brought his evening coat, he said, without turning around, "Do you know a wool merchant in Cresford town by the name of Ashby?" I said I did not, but that I could find out. "Find out," he said. Mr. Ashby was a respectable wool factor on the market square, I learned. He had a son in Nottingham and a daughter at home, Miss Wren Ashby, who ran the household accounts and was known by the local tradespeople as reliable and rather clever. She was not received in the great county houses. She was not remarkable in the way that county society meant by remarkable. She was simply there in her father's house, capable and overlooked. The Duke read this intelligence in the library on a Thursday evening, and on Friday morning he was dressed before I had set out his coat. I drove the carriage. We did not take the crested one. Miss Ashby's house was a solid stone-fronted house on the far side of the market square, respectable and unassuming, with a good window and a clean step. The Duke walked to the door and knocked before I had finished tying the horse, which was not his usual habit. She opened it herself. She was in a plain day dress, with an ink mark on 2 fingers and her hair only half arranged, and she looked up at him with the frank, direct look I had seen him describe once, briefly, when he told me only that the woman at the coaching inn had been quite unafraid of him. She was startled, but she was not frightened. He said, "Miss Ashby, my name is Callum Varnholme. I believe we met at the Cresford Inn in the storm last month." She was quiet a moment. The name was landing in her clearly. Then she said steadily, "I did not know at the time." "I know you didn't," he said. "I was glad of it." There was a pause, and then she said, "Would you like to come in?" He said yes. He went in. I waited with the horse in the January cold for an hour and 20 minutes, and when he came out, he was walking the way I had not seen him walk since before the campaign, the walk of a man who knows where he is going and is not bracing himself against the world. He said nothing until we were past the edge of the town. Then he said he gave her my given name. I said, "Yes, sir." "She called me Callum," he said once when I was leaving. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. They married in May, quietly, at the church in Cresford Market Town. There was no great county assembly, no candlelit ball to announce it to society, no procession of the shocked and humbled. There was only the church, and the morning light through old glass, and Miss Wren Ashby standing at the altar in a dress the color of cream, and the Duke of Varnholme standing beside her with the look of a man who has spent 3 years in a cold room and has finally simply come inside. He called her Wren. She called him Callum, and when she took his arm on the church step, and he turned toward her with his good side, and she looked up at him without adjusting, without accommodating, without any of the careful performance that the world had always staged around the fact of his injury, just looked at him directly the way she had looked at a cold man at a coaching-in fire and seen nothing but a man who needed warming. I understood what the silence in the library had been about all those weeks. He had gone looking for the person who had treated him like a person, and she had been there the whole time, on the far edge of his own estate lands, in her father's house, running the accounts and being thoroughly overlooked. Not by him, not anymore, not ever again.